All right, so then they have the temple. The temple is still busy, active, central to the Jews when Jesus comes into the picture. Jesus comes into the picture as what? The Lamb of God. And there we see the first picture is a picture of Jesus in the manger. And I always found that so appropriate, right? I've talked about this in my homilies, that Jesus is laid in a manger. What is a manger? It's a feeding trough. For who? Animals, right? It only makes sense that Jesus comes as food for the sheep. Who's the sheep? That's us. It makes sense to me. And it makes sense that he's going to be born in a town called Bethlehem. And what does Bethlehem mean? House of bread. House of bread. I mean, think about that. Jesus, of all the towns he could have been born in, he's born in the house of bread. And second, he's coming as a tiny little baby who's laid in a manger, which becomes food for the sheep. That's us. Then we have the next picture is Jesus comes into the public scene. Now he's beginning public ministry. He was kind of quiet for a long time. We didn't see him. He went to Egypt with his parents and he learned a lot, grew, blah, blah, blah. But now on his 30th year of life here on earth, he comes into the scene. He goes towards the Jordan River. This is huge. This is so pivotal. What does John the Baptist say? This is John the Baptist in the foreground here. As he points to Jesus, what does he say? Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Boom! Now, what in the world does it mean to call Jesus the Lamb? That's what we're going to go into. So here's Jesus being introduced to the world by John the Baptist, his cousin. And he says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So what does that mean? That Jesus is the Lamb. Because hearkening back again to the Old Testament, what in the world was the point of the sacrificing that God constantly asked his people to do? Right? What's the point of that? Right? I mean, you look at the book of Leviticus, for example, and the Numbers, but Leviticus especially. It is the most graphic description of how to sacrifice the lamb. I mean, they talk about cutting it open and, taking the guts out and putting the intestines here and the sprinkling blood everywhere. I mean, it is a mess. But why does God prescribe that to the people? Because when you think about it, that is how ugly sin is. And he wants to show a visual, graphic representation of the consequences of sin. And that the consequences of sin is death. And that why do you take a lamb? Because the lamb symbolizes the original innocence with which he created us. That Adam and Eve was created with this original innocence. And so in slaughtering that lamb that was just innocent, I mean, the lambs are amazing. When I was in New Zealand, I went there for vacation, and I was like, you're driving through the countryside and it was literally pure green pastures, rolling hills, and it's all like little cotton balls speckled all over those green fields. It's like beautiful. The sheep just kind of, and we went to a sheep show. It was kind of amazing. They had like these pyramid of steps, and then each step, a lamb ran in, a different type of a lamb, and then they would take this, and it was like different styles and different shapes and sizes and all that. Anyway, my point though is that they're so wonderful. They give us meat, they give us milk, they give us wool, and they do nothing wrong. All they do is eat grass and poop and give us so much, right? And so it's so innocent. It's like us at our creation. But then we would but sin is slaughtering of that original innocence that we had. So the Jews, the Israelites, were told to sacrifice that lamb in atonement for sins. It's a sacrifice of atonement. So it was a worship to say, I'm sorry to God. And so they would sacrifice this as their way of saying, we're sorry, Lord, for all the sins that we've committed as a people and as individuals. And so throughout history in the Old Testament, that's what they're doing, right? They're repenting. And now comes Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God now. And whereas in the past, it was just a symbolic prayer of the sacrificing of the lamb, in Jesus now, his sacrifice will be truly effective in the wiping away of sins. right? So we're going to go into that a little bit further, but in the middle picture there is the cleansing of the temple. Why does he cleanse this temple, right? Because he is making way, in a way, to be honest, for the new covenant. Because this temple, it is the symbol, the ultimate symbol of the old covenant, which is not a bad thing. But Jesus is here to build a new covenant, right? So he cleanses his temple. And the temple cleansing, how did it get this way? Because at Passover, the sacrificing of the lamb was a huge deal, and they had hundreds and hundreds of people coming from all over to sacrifice. So they needed to sell lambs, and they needed to sell, it was a big deal, right? So it turns into this huge marketplace. Now, we believe that Jesus' problem was not that they were selling these lambs, because he understands basic economy, we need that. So I think the problem that Jesus saw was that these lambs that they were buying were actually in the temple itself. And that was what was bothering him. It would be like if I was allowing for the Knights of Columbus to sell their pancakes inside our church, or having all these vendors sitting inside our actual church. No, we've got to be on the outside. So Jesus had a problem probably with all of that money exchanging and everything, but also it was his way of saying that he's inaugurating a new form of worship. And so there's this cleansing of the temple. Then finally, of course, we get to the Last Supper. What is the Last Supper again? It's the Passover meal. Remember that. It's the Passover meal. That meal that was prescribed long, long, long ago to the Israelites when they were in Egypt, right? And the angel of death flying through, killing all the firstborns except for the houses with the blood painted on its doors. The angel passed over, right? So this Last Supper account is the Passover meal. And that's the meal that Jesus says, where Jesus takes bread, gives thanks, breaks it, gives it to his disciples, and says, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you." How? On the cross. All right? So that's the kind of the epic sketch backdrop of the whole Bible and how it leads to the Eucharist as we know it today.